Hello, I'm Francis Seeley from Enfield Climate Action Forum, and in our June meeting of our forum, we discussed three topics. We discussed transport and climate change, we looked at green spaces and parks and a strategy that could be developed around climate change, and we looked at how faith communities are addressing the issue of climate change. Well, we asked each of the coordinators of those three groups if they would give us some feedback about how the discussion went. And so we thought we would publish this here so you could hear that and see what action points may indeed come out of it. First then, let's look at transport. That was led by Clare Rogers of Better Streets.
We urgently need to prioritise walking and cycling at the moment because of COVID-19. I had a huge list of points, but we were like, well, which ones are the most urgent to prioritise? And that was at the top: low traffic neighbourhoods, walking and cycling. We also talked about public transport. When we can start using with places that are very badly served by public transport, like buses. And is there a scope for something that isn't quite a bus but isn't quite a taxi, that's something in between? As we've seen used in the developing world. We talked about supporting car-free developments. We talked about controlled parking zones and less car parking generally. And we talked about, as a community, with all the community groups in Enfield, how can they get plugged in with the council and say, well, I want a low traffic neighbourhood. It's a sort of email action you can do at the moment. If you go to the link, it's a campaign called Stop the Traffic Tide, and it takes you to, you can send an email to Enfield Council leader to say, please stop the traffic coming back by providing for walking and cycling.
We then looked at green spaces and parks and the possibility of developing a strategy there around climate change. And Kim Lumley from the Friends of Broomfield Park led that discussion, and we could hear what he said here.
So we started focusing on trees, and we were talking about the importance of mature trees and the risk of losing them and they're not being replaced, and that seemed to be a common concern across quite a few groups. Talk about the difficulty of talking to the council, choosing what trees might be replaced, and then how you get good quality mature trees to replace. And the council aren't going to do that, so we have to think about whether we're going to do it through fundraising or applying for grants. But a particular interest is in starting off tree nurseries and growing saplings into 2 or 3 year old trees that can be planted by the council. And the Enfield Society have already started doing that. We're thinking about that in Broomfield Park, and it's important to have trees that have local heritage, to come from trees that we know are good. And that would be a really good thing for us to do between parks and share them. And coming on to that was about monoplanting. Often the response is just to plant lime trees in long lines, and with the lack of diversity, the risk of diseases coming and wiping the whole lot out, like Dutch elm. So a lot of thought ought to go into that and discussion. We spoke about the problem of weed killer being used everywhere outside parks, on pavements around the tree bases, and how much better it might be if wildflowers were allowed to grow around them. I think it was Louise who said there's a current government committee on tree planting, and they're asking for responses. Yeah, we spoke about the importance of getting community involvement, particularly young people, children. The difficulty of access to green spaces and tree spaces, particularly in the east part of the borough. Yeah, so that was pretty much what we did about trees. We then went on to recycling, and again we could have, and litter, and we could have spent an awful lot of time talking about that. It sounds like everywhere is suffering from the same problem, with litter bins overflowing and litter left all over parks, and the inability to recycle. And ideas about thinking of different ways to encourage people to take the litter home or to put it in the correct bins. Maybe finding different methods, trialing them in different parks, and maybe we could liaise between friends groups of parks and do some sort of project on that, which might start with a survey of how bins are used. The idea that I know has been used around other parts of the country, that we might take bins out of parks and have a campaign to persuade people to take their litter home and involve the local community and young people in that is something worth looking at. Also, I think it was Carol said she tried to get a water fountain into the park to allow people to refill bottles so we get less plastic waste. And again, that's something, I know the council are quite resistant to these things, and we really need to act in large groups together to try and get an effect on that. And that goes to recycling as well. In Broomfield Park, we do have some recycling bins, but no collection service. But I think that's the same for all parks and public bins across Enfield, that there is no recycling service available. I think that's as far as we got.
Finally, we looked at how faith communities are addressing the issue of climate change, what they're doing about it, how they're getting their people together, how they're looking at their buildings and their community. And Melanie Smith of the United Reformed Church led that discussion, and she tells us what happened here.
Thanks, Francis. We had many years of experiences and many ideas in the groups, both for how we can engage our own constituents, as it were, in our faith groups with the issues and things that have worked for that, and also some detailed suggestions about different recycling schemes that we could all support within the churches. But I think the main thrust of our discussion was the fact that we do all believe, and most of us being from faith groups probably would say it, is that the faith groups do have a moral voice still in society, and therefore if the faith leaders in Enfield were able to make some kind of joint statement, then that could be very, very powerful. We realise that we won't get one very, very quickly because the number of institutions and people involved, but it doesn't mean that isn't something that we shouldn't aim for. So, and tying that in with teaching within the faith institutions as well, to make sure that if we do manage to get a faith statement, that the faith leaders are talking about that to their own constituents as well. But also more specifically is trying to tackle some of the specific issues that are faced, not just by faith institutions, but by many different places. But maybe with the number of people that go to the different faith institutions with Enfield, we could go a long way to get the 40,000 signatures required to petition the council for some things. And the particular issue that came up, which was really following on from something we did at the last meeting, was about making it far easier for faith institutions to be able to recycle and not have to pay for that recycling to happen, and perhaps that could be counted as recycling with as it would be with domestic scheme, to make that far easier for that to happen. We could also request a deputation, which is another way of us thinking about to the cabinet, another way for us to think about doing that, but perhaps is not one or the other, because it's also about bringing communities along with us, and so raising interest. So it may even be that petition might have some advantages over the direct route into the cabinet, but we didn't really talk about that in detail. And I think really as action points, I would say they're the main two. We were sort of also coming on to the idea that when people can meet again, there's an interfaith day normally, so the Faith Forum could perhaps host an interfaith event, which I think I could lobby quite hard that have an environmental climate change theme on that occasion, and see whether we can bring things together on that, at least try and bring it up through the Faith Forum as well. So I think that's in summary of what we said. We've so big ideas and more detailed ideas, and I think some things that NCAF can actually get behind and do.